Alex sat nervously in the courtroom, his hands trembling as the judge spoke in a low, serious tone. He had never been in trouble with the law before. His life had been simple, working a regular job, living a quiet life. But now his world had turned upside down. It had all started one cold winter night. Alex had been on his way home from work when he stopped at a convenience store. He had no idea that this decision would change his life forever. Inside the store, a robbery had just taken place. A man dressed in black had stormed in, brandishing a gun. The police arrived quickly, and the suspect was taken into custody. But the problem was Alex had been in the store at the same time. He had been caught on a security camera, standing near the counter with no real connection to the crime. The police didn't have all the facts, though. They didn't ask enough questions. Instead, they saw a black man in the store at the wrong time, and they made assumptions based on nothing but stereotypes. The robbery suspect had been caught, but Alex had been swept up in the investigation. Before he knew it, Alex was charged with being an accomplice. It made no sense. He had never met the man, never even spoken to him. But in the eyes of the law, Alex was guilty by association. The trial had been a blur. His public defender hadn't done much to help him. There were no witnesses to speak on his behalf, and the evidence against him was weak at best. But the prosecutor had painted a picture of Alex as a man involved in something much bigger than he was. It didn't matter that Alex was innocent. It didn't matter that he had no criminal history. The system was already moving forward, and there was no way to stop it. Now, here he was, sentenced to 5 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. He felt lost, confused, and angry. What had happened to him was unfair. He had been caught in the system, and no one cared about the truth. As the judge banged his gavel, sentencing him to serve time, Alex couldn't help but feel like he was losing everything. The prison was nothing like he had imagined. He had heard stories about what life behind bars was like, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality. The air smelled of old cement, and the walls felt as though they were closing in on him. The sound of the heavy doors slamming shut behind him echoed in his mind. He was now part of a world he had never known, a world that didn't care about his innocence. It was a place where survival mattered more than justice. The guards were cold and impersonal. They treated the prisoners like animals, herding them from one place to another without a second thought. Alex didn't understand the rules of this place, didn't know how to navigate the prison system. He kept his head down, hoping that if he stayed quiet and followed the rules, he would be left alone. But that wasn't the case for long. The other inmates started to notice him. He was new, different from the others. He was quiet, reserved, and didn't show much fear. At first, this made him a target. The men who ran the prison's underground world saw Alex as someone who could be taken advantage of. They didn't like that he kept to himself. They didn't like that he wasn't eager to join their groups. It wasn't long before Alex caught the attention of a powerful gang inside the prison. They were known for being ruthless, for breaking down anyone who stood in their way. They saw Alex as an easy mark, an outsider who didn't know how things worked. They began to make his life harder, spreading rumors and threats, hoping to break him down. Alex didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to violence. He wasn't a fighter. Back in the real world, he had lived a peaceful life, never having to defend himself. But in this place, the rules were different. It wasn't enough to be a good person. You had to show strength or you would be crushed. Days turned into weeks, and Alex found himself feeling more and more isolated. His fellow inmates either ignored him or avoided him. He wasn't the kind of person to engage in the prison's dangerous activities, and that made him a target. He spent most of his time reading or keeping to himself, but the gang's harassment never stopped. They would corner him in the hallways, shove him against the walls, and demand that he pay them protection money. When Alex refused, the intimidation only got worse. At night, he lay in his small, cold cell trying to sleep, but his mind raced. He thought about his family, about his life before this nightmare started. He thought about how much he had lost. He had been wrongfully convicted, thrown into this hellish place, and now he had to survive. He couldn't understand why this was happening to him. What had he done to deserve this? There were moments when he felt hopeless, moments when the weight of his situation seemed too much to bear. But deep down, there was a small spark of something, a desire to fight back. He wasn't sure how or when, but he knew he couldn't let these people destroy him. He had to find a way to survive, to stay strong, and maybe, just maybe, There was still a way to prove his innocence. Little did Alex know that his story was about to take a turn. Something from his past that he had buried deep inside was about to surface, and it would change everything. He didn't yet know it, but he wasn't just a regular man. He was something much more. Someone with the skills and strength to fight back against the darkness of the prison world. And one day those skills would come to the surface. But for now, all Alex could do was survive. His days in prison were filled with uncertainty and fear. But slowly, he began to learn the ways of the prison, understanding who the dangerous players were and where to avoid them. He realized that in order to make it through, he had to find allies, people who could watch his back. But trust was hard to come by in a place where everyone had their own hidden agenda. He kept his head low, focused on surviving one day at a time. But even as the gang grew more aggressive, even as the pressure mounted, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to his story. Something that had been buried for a long time. Something that would eventually give him the strength to break free. Alex couldn't shake the feeling that things were getting worse. He had barely settled into the rhythm of prison life when it became clear that he wasn't going to be left alone. He had hoped at first that if he kept to himself and avoided trouble, he could get through this. But that wasn't the reality of prison. The moment you stepped inside, you became part of a world where power, respect, and survival were the only things that mattered. It didn't take long for the gang to start picking on him. They were everywhere, lurking in the shadows, watching the new arrivals and testing anyone they thought might be weak. Alex had been targeted right from the start. It wasn't because he had done anything wrong. It was because he was different. He was quiet, kept his head down, and didn't seem to care about the things that mattered to most of the other prisoners. He wasn't looking for trouble, but trouble was looking for him. The first time they came after him, it was in the mess hall. Alex was sitting alone as usual at a small table in the corner, eating his food and trying to keep to himself. That's when the leader of the gang, a large man with tattoos covering his arms and neck, approached. The man didn't even say anything at first. He just stood there, blocking Alex's way, staring down at him with a cold, unblinking gaze. Alex felt a chill run through him. He had seen this man around before, but he hadn't thought much of it. Now, as the man loomed over him, he realized he was in trouble. The air felt thick, and Alex could almost hear the silent warning. He wasn't sure what the man wanted, but he had a feeling that whatever it wasn't good. The gang leader finally spoke, his voice low and menacing. "You don't belong here, do you?" He wasn't asking for information. He was stating it. "You think you can just come in and hide in the corner pretending nothing's going on?" Alex didn't know what to say. He had heard rumors about how things worked in prison, but nothing could have prepared him for this moment. He wanted to stand up and defend himself, but something told him that speaking up might make things worse. So instead of arguing, he just nodded slightly, trying to keep his composure. The man smirked, seemingly satisfied with the silence. "Well, you're wrong. You're not invisible here. You're gonna pay for your place just like the rest of us. You'll find out how things work real quick." With that, he turned and walked away, but not before making sure Alex felt his eyes on him for the rest of the meal. That night, Alex couldn't sleep. The tension in the air seemed to cling to his skin, making it impossible to rest. He lay awake, staring at the cold concrete walls of his cell, replaying the encounter over and over in his mind. He had no idea what was coming, but he knew that this was just the beginning. The next day, things escalated. The gang's harassment didn't stop with just words. They started to physically intimidate him. At first, it was small things, tripping him as he walked down the hall, pushing him out of the way in the yard. But as time went on, the attacks became more frequent and more violent. They would shove him into corners, take his food tray, and laugh as he tried to fight back. Alex wasn't used to this kind of aggression. He had grown up in a peaceful environment, where people respected each other. But in this world, respect had to be earned through fear, and Alex wasn't sure how to make himself stand out. One day, things reached a boiling point. Alex was walking back to his cell when the gang cornered him in the hallway. This time there were more of them. The leader was there along with several others, blocking his way. Alex could feel the pressure building, and for a moment he thought he might not make it out alive. "You think you're better than us?" the leader sneered. "You think you can just walk around here like you don't have to answer to anyone? You don't belong here, and we're going to make sure you know it." Alex's heart raced. His mind was spinning, trying to figure out what to do. He knew that if he didn't find a way out of this situation, Things could turn deadly. But he couldn't just give in. He wasn't going to let these men break him. Not without a fight, but he wasn't ready for the fight they had in mind. One of the men from the gang lunged at him, knocking him to the ground. Alex barely had time to react before the others piled on, punching and kicking him. Pain exploded through his body, but he fought back, pushing and shoving, trying to free himself. He knew that if he didn't, they would keep coming for him. In the chaos, a voice shouted out, and suddenly the group backed off. Alex lay on the ground, gasping for breath, his body aching. He looked up to see one of the guards standing at the end of the hallway, a stern look on his face. The gang scattered quickly, disappearing into the shadows like rats. The guard didn't say anything to Alex. He just walked away, leaving him there, bruised and bleeding. Alex slowly got to his feet, wiping blood from his lip. He had learned something important today. In prison, you had to fight to survive. If you didn't, you would be swallowed whole. The gang was going to keep coming after him, and he had no choice but to stand his ground. But he also realized that fighting back wasn't going to be enough. He needed to find a way to make the gang back off, to make them understand that he wasn't someone to mess with. In the days that followed, Alex began to notice things. He watched the other prisoners closely, learning the unspoken rules of the prison. He started to see who the players were, the men who ran the show, who had the power and respect. He realized that in this world, it wasn't just about physical strength. It was about reputation. If you could command respect, you didn't have to fight as much. Alex didn't have a reputation yet, but he was starting to understand how to build one. He began to work on his body, getting stronger. He spent hours in the gym, pushing himself to his limits. But he also knew that physical strength alone wasn't going to be enough. He needed to learn the politics of prison, who to trust, who to avoid, and how to make the right connections. It wasn't long before he found someone who seemed to know the ropes. A quiet man named Leon had been watching Alex from the sidelines. He wasn't part of any gang, but he had a reputation as someone who knew how to survive in prison. Leon had a calm, confident way about him, and Alex found himself drawn to him. After a few days of subtle glances and quiet nods, Leon finally approached Alex in the yard. "I've been watching you," Leon said, his voice low and even. "You're new here, and that's never easy. But you've got potential. You're not like the others. You don't look for trouble, but you don't back down either. I can show you how to make it through this place if you're interested." Alex didn't know what to say. He had been expecting more trouble, more pain. But this offer, this was something different. It was the chance to learn, to survive. He nodded, feeling a small spark of hope in the darkness. Maybe, just maybe, he could make it out of this place alive. As days passed in the prison, Alex's life began to feel like a never-ending cycle of fear, tension, and survival. The gang that had been targeting him showed no sign of stopping. Their attacks grew more frequent, and the pressure on him became unbearable. He knew he had to find a way out, but every time he thought he had an idea, something new would happen to throw him off track. Then, one afternoon, as he was walking back from the yard to his cell, he ran into Leon again. This time Leon was standing near the entrance to the hall, his arms crossed, watching Alex approach with a serious look on his face. "You're looking rough," Leon said, his voice soft but firm. "The gang's been on you for a while now, hasn't it?" Alex just nodded, exhausted from the constant harassment. "I don't know how much more I can take." Leon studied him for a moment. "I can help you," he said quietly, "but you've got to trust me. I know how this place works, and you don't want to be fighting everyone in here. It'll only make things worse." Alex felt a flicker of hope, but he was also hesitant. He wasn't sure if he could trust Leon, though something in the other man's eyes made him believe that this time, help was really being offered. "I'm listening," Alex said cautiously. Leon looked around to make sure no one was nearby, then leaned in. "You don't need to fight back with your fists. In prison, it's all about respect. You've got to show people you're not an easy target, but you don't need to punch your way out of every situation. That's what the gang wants. They want you to react, to give them a reason to keep coming after you." Alex's mind raced. Everything Leon said made sense. But how could he gain respect without putting himself in even more danger? What could he possibly do to turn things around when the whole system seemed stacked against him? Leon continued, "What you need to do is shift the balance of power. Find something they want, and then make them come to you." Alex frowned, unsure of what that meant. "What do you mean, find something they want?" Leon gave a small smile, almost as if he was proud of the question. Look, this place runs on alliances. It's about who has the power, who has the connections, and who can make things happen. You don't have to be the strongest or the loudest, but if you can get in with the right people, things change. Alex still didn't fully understand, but he knew this was his chance. He had to try something different. He had been following the rules, keeping his head down, but now it seemed like that wasn't enough. He needed to learn the ropes to navigate the dangerous world of prison politics, and Leon seemed to be the one who could help him do that. "I'm ready," Alex said, though he felt a bit uncertain about what he was getting himself into. Leon nodded. "Good, first things first, start watching. Pay attention to who's in charge of things, who's making deals, who's getting things done. The gang that's been bothering you, they answer to someone. Everyone in here does." Alex began to spend more time in the yard and the common areas watching the prisoners interact with each other. He saw the way people treated the gang members. There was fear in the air whenever they walked by. But he also saw the respect people gave to others, those who didn't need to resort to violence to maintain their power. Slowly, Alex began to realize that prison wasn't just about brute force. It was about knowing how to read people, how to use your resources wisely, and how to make the right connections. He learned about the inner workings of the prison. There were certain people who controlled the flow of goods, cigarettes, food, small luxuries that were hard to come by. These people had power because they had what others wanted. If you could find a way to get on their good side, you could survive. One afternoon, Alex had his first real test. He was sitting alone in the yard trying to keep his head down when he saw one of the men from the gang approach him. This was the moment he had been dreading. The gang member, a tall man with a menacing glare, stopped in front of Alex's bench and stared him down. "You think you're clever, huh?" the man sneered. "You think you can just ignore us and get away with it?" Alex looked up at the man, his heart pounding in his chest. But this time he didn't flinch. He didn't back away. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, learning the subtle ways of handling these confrontations. He knew that showing fear would only make it worse. Instead, he looked the man in the eye and took a deep breath. "I'm not looking for trouble," Alex said, his voice calm but firm. "But I'm not going to let anyone walk all over me either." The gang member seemed taken aback by Alex's response. For a moment, the air was thick with tension, and Alex wondered if he had made a mistake. But then, just as quickly, the gang member laughed, a harsh, cold sound that sent a shiver down Alex's spine. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," the man said, stepping back. "But you're not done with us." "Not by a long shot." Alex nodded, but inside he felt a sense of relief. He hadn't backed down. He had stood his ground without resorting to violence. He didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time since arriving in prison, he felt like he had made a small step toward taking control of his situation. Over the next few weeks, Alex continued to work on building his reputation. He took Leon's advice to heart and began to form alliances with others who had the influence he needed. He wasn't trying to become the leader of the prison, he didn't want that. But he wanted to gain enough respect to stay out of harm's way, to make sure that the gang would think twice before targeting him again. As time passed, Alex noticed something else. The more he interacted with the other prisoners, the more he realized that many of them were just like him. They had made mistakes or been wronged by the system, but now they were stuck in a world where survival was everything. They weren't criminals at heart, just people trying to make it through each day. In a way, Alex started to feel a sense of camaraderie with them. He wasn't alone anymore. He had friends, allies, people who understood his struggle. And with their support, Alex began to find a sense of purpose, a reason to keep fighting. But the road ahead was still uncertain. The gang had not forgotten about him, and the threat of danger loomed over him every day. But for the first time, Alex had hope. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was becoming a force to be reckoned with in this harsh, unforgiving world, and he knew that sooner or later things would change. He could feel it in his bones. One way or another, he was going to take back control of his life. Over the next few weeks, Alex started to notice changes. The gang that had been terrorizing him seemed to back off. It wasn't that they had lost interest in him, but rather that they had come to understand something important. Alex wasn't going to be an easy target. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He had changed, and the people around him could see it. Alex had spent countless hours observing the behavior of the other prisoners. He watched how they interacted, Who had the power and who was simply trying to survive? Through his quiet observations and subtle actions, he had begun to gain the respect of some of the more influential inmates. He wasn't looking to become a leader, but he wanted to be someone people could count on. A person who wasn't weak, but who also didn't need to resort to violence to prove himself. One afternoon, as he sat on the bench in the yard, Leon approached him with a smile. He had become one of Alex's few allies in the prison, someone he could trust. "You've done well," Leon said, sitting down beside him. "I've been watching. The gang's not bothering you like they used to?" Alex nodded, but he wasn't entirely convinced. "They've backed off for now, but that doesn't mean they're done with me. They'll find another way to get to me." Leon chuckled softly. "That's true, but you're getting stronger, Alex. You're learning the rules of this place, and that's what matters most. In here, it's not always about being tough. It's about knowing who to trust and when to push back. You figured that out." Alex wasn't sure if he felt stronger, but he could tell that the way people looked at him had changed. He wasn't just some quiet guy trying to survive anymore. He was starting to carve out his own space in the prison, a space where he wasn't constantly looking over his shoulder. And for the first time, he felt like he had some control over his own life. But there were still challenges. The prison was full of power struggles, and while Alex was learning how to navigate them, he knew he couldn't let his guard down. Every day was still a battle. He had to stay alert, aware of the shifting alliances and the way people used each other for their own gain. In a place like this, trust was a luxury few could afford. A few days after his conversation with Leon, Alex found himself in the yard again, walking alone. He had learned to enjoy these quiet moments when he could think and clear his mind. But this time, things were different. As he walked, he felt eyes on him. Not just one set of eyes, but several. He glanced around and saw that the gang members were watching him from a distance. Their leader, the man who had tormented him from the very beginning, was standing with a few of his men. They were talking quietly, but Alex could tell they were discussing him. His heart began to race. Was this it? Were they about to make their move? He didn't know, but one thing was certain. He couldn't let them get to him. Not now. Not after everything he had been through. He straightened up, walking with more purpose, hoping that his calmness would send a message. As he continued walking, the gang leader suddenly called out to him. "You think you've got this figured out, huh?" The leader's voice was loud and filled with arrogance. "You think you can just avoid us, keep your distance, and everything will be fine?" Alex stopped walking and turned to face the gang. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a moment to compose himself. The leader's words were meant to provoke him, but Alex wasn't going to fall for it. Not this time. He knew the gang was trying to get a reaction out of him. They were testing him, and Alex wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing him scared. The leader smirked. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But guts alone aren't enough to survive here. You're not untouchable. We can break you whenever we want." Alex took a deep breath, staying calm despite the tension building between them. "I'm not here to fight you," he said quietly. "I'm just trying to live my life." The gang leader's smile faltered for a moment, and Alex could see a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The words hung in the air for a moment, but instead of pressing the issue, the leader simply nodded. "We'll see," he muttered before turning and walking away, his gang following behind him. Alex stood there for a moment, his heart still pounding, but a sense of victory filled him. He had held his ground. He hadn't backed down, and he hadn't let his fear take control. This was a small win, but it was a win nonetheless. And for Alex, that meant everything. Over the next few days, things seemed to settle down. The gang didn't bother him as much, and even though he couldn't be sure if they had truly given up on trying to break him, he started to feel like he had earned a certain amount of peace. He still had to watch his back, of course, but the tension in the air felt less suffocating. It was as if the other prisoners were beginning to see him differently. He was no longer the easy target, no longer the quiet guy who wouldn't fight back. That wasn't to say Alex was free from trouble. Prison was a place where nothing stayed calm for long, and Alex knew that one mistake could send everything spiraling. But for now, he had built a small bubble of safety around himself. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't guaranteed to last, but it was enough. Leon continued to check in on him, offering advice and guidance when needed. He had become a mentor of sorts, showing Alex how to navigate the more complex parts of prison life. Leon was a quiet man, but he knew how to read people. how to get things done without ever raising his voice. Alex was learning a lot from him, lessons that would help him survive in this harsh world. One day, as Alex sat in the common area reading a book, a guard approached him. The guard was a middle-aged man with a stern face, someone Alex hadn't interacted with much. "Hey you," the guard said, his voice gruff. "You've got a visitor." Alex's heart skipped a beat. A visitor? He hadn't seen anyone from the outside in months. Could it be a lawyer? Could someone finally be looking into his case? His mind raced with questions as he stood up. The guard led him down the hall, and as they approached the visiting area, Alex's stomach tightened. He had no idea who was waiting for him on the other side. When he stepped into the room, he was surprised to see a man standing there, someone he didn't recognize. The man was dressed in a suit, his expression serious but not unfriendly. Alex stopped in his tracks, wondering who this person could be. "Are you Alex?" the man asked, his voice calm but firm. Alex nodded slowly, still unsure of what was going on. "Yes, I am." The man extended a hand. "I'm from the Department of Justice. We've been looking into your case." Alex's heart raced. Could this be it? Could this finally be the moment when he would be exonerated? Alex sat across from the man in the suit, trying to process what was happening. The visitor from the Department of Justice had just confirmed that they were looking into his case. He was barely able to breathe, his heart pounding in his chest. Was this really happening? Was there finally someone who cared about his innocence? The man continued, his voice calm but serious. "We've reviewed the details of your trial, and we believe there were significant errors. There were witnesses who weren't called to testify, evidence that wasn't properly considered, and several procedural issues that should have led to a different outcome. We've been working to get your case reopened." Alex didn't know what to say. The weight of his words hit him hard. All this time he had felt trapped, stuck in a world where his voice didn't matter, where his side of the story was never heard. Now it seemed like things were finally starting to change. "Are you saying, you're going to get me out?" Alex asked, his voice barely a whisper, filled with disbelief. The man nodded, a small but reassuring smile crossing his face. "It's not going to be easy, but we've started the process. There's still a long road ahead, but we're going to do everything we can to get you released." Alex couldn't believe what he was hearing. For so long he had resigned himself to the fact that he would be stuck here forever, fighting against a system that had already decided his fate. But now, for the first time in years, there was a spark of hope. Maybe he wasn't as powerless as he had thought. "Thank you," Alex said, the words heavy with gratitude. "I don't know what to say. I've been waiting for someone to listen." The man's eyes softened. "You've been through a lot. You deserve justice, and we intend to make sure you get it." As Alex sat in the visiting room, his mind was racing. It felt like his entire world had just shifted. But there was something else there, too. A sense of nervousness. What would life be like when he was released? Would everything go back to normal? Or would he always be haunted by the memory of the years he spent in prison for a crime he didn't commit? The man from the Department of Justice stood up, signaling that their meeting was coming to an end. "We'll keep you updated as the process moves forward. But for now, stay strong. We're going to make sure this is set right." As Alex walked back to his cell, he felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, hope, but also fear. What if it didn't work out? What if the system was too broken to fix? He pushed those thoughts aside. For the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of something he hadn't felt in years: control. The next few days passed slowly. Alex SP ended his time in his cell thinking about the future. He still had to live through the day-to-day of prison life, and the gang members hadn't forgotten about him. But now he had something they didn't, a chance. He had a reason to keep his head up, a reason to keep fighting. Leon, his ally in the prison, noticed the change in Alex. The once quiet, unsure man had become more confident, more focused. He was no longer the easy target that the gang had once thought he was. Alex had earned a certain level of respect, not just from the other inmates, but from himself. He had gone from being a victim to someone who was starting to take charge of his own life. Leon approached him one day in the yard, a thoughtful look on his face. "I can see it in you, man. You're different now. You've got that fire back." Alex smiled, but it was a bittersweet smile. "I guess you could say that. I've got a shot at getting out of here, Leon. The Department of Justice is looking into my case. They said they're going to work on getting me out." Leon's eyes widened with surprise. "That's incredible, man. You deserve it. You've been through enough. You've earned this, Alex nodded. I don't know what's going to happen yet, but for the first time I feel like there's hope. Like I'm not just stuck in this place forever. Leon clapped him on the back. You've earned that hope, Alex. Don't ever let it go. Even as Alex felt a wave of optimism wash over him, he knew that nothing was certain. Prison had a way of breaking people, of making them doubt everything they thought they knew. He had to stay grounded, stay focused. But it was hard not to dream of the outside world, of freedom. He had spent so many years feeling like a caged animal, waiting for someone to unlock the door. Now the key was finally within reach. Days turned into weeks, and as Alex awaited the outcome of the investigation into his case, things in the prison began to quiet down. The gang that had been tormenting him seemed to have lost interest, or perhaps they had bigger problems to deal with. Alex didn't care. He was no longer concerned with them. He had bigger things to think about. Then one afternoon, Alex was called to the warden's office. His heart sank as he walked down the long hallway, wondering if something had gone wrong with his case. When he entered the office, the warden was sitting behind his desk, a serious expression on his face. Alex, sit down, the warden said, gesturing to the chair in front of him. Alex sat down, his nerves on edge. The warden looked at him for a moment, then spoke. We've received word that the Department of Justice has made significant progress on your case. They're confident that you will be exonerated. They've already begun the paperwork for your release. Alex's breath caught in his throat. Could it be true? Could he really be getting out? You're scheduled for release in a few weeks, the warden continued. Everything is moving forward, and as long as there are no complications, you'll be free soon. The words didn't fully sink in at first. Alex had spent so long in prison, had fought so hard to stay strong that it was hard to believe it was actually happening. But as the reality of the situation settled in, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He was going home. Over the next few weeks, Alex went through the process of preparing for his release. He had to go through paperwork, medical exams, and final interviews with the authorities, but each step felt like a victory. Every step closer to the door of the prison made him feel more and more alive. He had never been so excited to walk out of a place, but more than that, he was ready to live again. The day of his release finally arrived. Alex stood outside the prison gates looking at the world beyond. For so long he had been trapped, fighting for survival, but now he was free to rebuild his life, to prove his innocence, and to make sure no one else had to go through what he had endured. He looked back at the prison one last time, the place where he had learned so much about survival, strength, and hope. But as he turned and walked away, he knew that his story was far from over. He was just getting started. As Alex walked out of the prison gates, the world around him seemed almost unreal. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow on everything, and for the first time in years he felt a sense of freedom that was both overwhelming and beautiful. He had spent so long behind bars that the outside world felt foreign, like he had been living in a dream. He stepped forward, taking in a deep breath of fresh air, and it felt like the weight of the world had been lifted from his shoulders. But as he walked down the path leading away from the prison, he couldn't help but feel conflicted. On one hand, he was free. He had fought so hard for this moment, and now it was finally here. But on the other hand, he was walking into a world that had moved on without him. Years had passed. Friends, family, everything had changed. He didn't know what awaited him beyond the gates, but he knew it was time to find out. As Alex made his way down the road, he felt a strange mixture of excitement and fear. He was no longer a prisoner, but that didn't mean he had everything figured out. The outside world was full of opportunities, yes, but also challenges. How would he rebuild his life? How would he explain to everyone what had happened to him? So many questions filled his mind, but the most pressing one was, where do I go from here? After a few moments of walking, Alex spotted a taxi waiting on the side of the road. The driver, a middle-aged man, looked at Alex with a curious gaze as he approached the car. Alex wasn't sure where he needed to go yet, but he knew that being alone with his thoughts wasn't going to help. He needed to reach out to someone, to talk to someone who could help him figure out what to do next. Hey, could you take me to the nearest bus station? Alex asked, his voice uncertain. The taxi driver nodded without a word, and Alex climbed into the back seat. The ride was quiet at first, and Alex stared out of the window, watching the scenery pass by. He thought about everything that had happened, The trial, the years in prison, the people who had believed he was guilty when he was innocent. He thought about his family, the people who had given up on him, and whether he would ever be able to regain their trust. But most of all, he thought about the future. For the first time, he realized he had a chance to shape his own destiny. As the taxi pulled up to the bus station, Alex paid the driver and got out. He stood in front of the station for a moment, unsure of what to do. There were so many directions he could go, but the thought of just heading off without a plan felt unsettling. He needed to figure out his next step. Before he could think any further, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Alex pulled it out, surprised to see a message from a number he didn't recognize. It was a text from an old friend, someone he hadn't spoken to in years. His heart skipped a beat as he read the message. "I heard you were out. I'm glad you're finally free. I'm here for you whenever you need someone to talk to." It was a simple message, but it meant the world to Alex. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear those words. There were people out there who still cared about him. He wasn't alone. Alex quickly typed back a response, his fingers trembling as he did. "Thanks, it means a lot to me. I'm not sure where to go from here, but I'd love to catch up." Within minutes, he received a reply. "Let's meet up. I'll be there in an hour." Alex smiled, feeling a small spark of hope in his chest. He wasn't sure where this new chapter in his life would take him, but at least he had a friend by his side. That was more than he could have hoped for just a few hours ago. As he sat down on a bench near the bus station, Alex tried to gather his thoughts. It had been so long since he had been part of the outside world, and everything felt different. The people, the noise, the way the world seemed to keep moving no matter what. But he was here now, and that was all that mattered. He had made it out, and he wasn't going to let this second chance slip away. An hour later, as promised, Alex's friend arrived. The man looked almost the same, though his face had changed with the passing years. He walked toward Alex with a warm smile, and Alex couldn't help but feel a sense of comfort at seeing a familiar face. "You look good, man," the friend said, clapping him on the back. Alex chuckled, feeling a bit awkward. "I'm not sure about that, but I'm doing okay. It's been a long time, I know. I can't believe it's really you. I heard about what happened. The whole story. You didn't deserve that." Alex felt a knot form in his throat as he listened to his friend speak. It had been so long since anyone had acknowledged his innocence, let alone his pain. The words felt like a weight being lifted from his chest. "It's been tough," Alex admitted, looking down at his shoes. "I've had a lot of time to think, and it's not easy to just pick up where I left off. I don't even know where to start." His friend sat down beside him on the bench. "You don't have to figure it all out right now. I'm here for you. We'll take it one step at a time, okay? You don't have to do this alone." Tears welled up in Alex's eyes, but he fought to keep them back. For so long, he had felt like an outsider in the world, like he didn't belong anywhere. But here, with this friend who cared, Alex felt like maybe, just maybe, he had a place in this world after all. "I don't even know where to begin. I don't have a job. I don't have anywhere to live. I feel like I'm starting from nothing," Alex said, his voice barely above a whisper. His friend nodded sympathetically. "I know. It's going to take time, but you've got the strength to get through this. You've already proven that. You've come so far." Alex took a deep breath and nodded. He wasn't sure where to go next, but he knew he wasn't alone anymore. He had someone to lean on, someone who had his back. And that was enough to get him started. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of change. With the help of his friend, Alex began to rebuild his life. They found a small apartment for him to rent, and his friend helped him get a job at a local mechanics shop. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. Slowly, Alex began to settle into his new life. He was no longer a prisoner. He was a man with a future, but the road wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when Alex felt like he didn't belong in the world outside. The scars from his time in prison were still fresh, and there were times when the memories would flood back, times when the darkness seemed overwhelming. But every time he thought about giving up, he remembered the words of his friend, the person who had been there for him when no one else was. One step at a time. That's how Alex would rebuild his life. Alex's new life was far from perfect, but it was his. After years of fighting to survive in prison, the world outside had a sense of peace that Alex was still learning to embrace. The first few months were challenging, and there were days when the weight of his past would try to pull him back down. But he had come a long way, and he knew that moving forward, even when it was difficult, was the only way to truly escape the shadows of his past. His job at the mechanic's shop wasn't glamorous, but it gave him a sense of purpose. The work was tough, but it kept him busy, and it was a reminder that he had a future worth fighting for. The shop wasn't anything fancy, just a small garage with a few worn-out tools and a couple of old cars lined up for repairs. But it was a start. The first time he picked up a wrench and got to work on a car, he felt a rush of pride. It was simple work, but it felt like he was putting the pieces of his life back together, one task at a time. His boss, a kind man named Mike, was understanding and patient. He didn't ask too many questions about Alex's past, and that was a relief. All Alex wanted was to work, to stay focused, and to slowly rebuild the life that had been stolen from him. Mike had been a constant source of support, teaching Alex not just about cars, but about patience and resilience. He had an easygoing nature that helped Alex feel more comfortable, even during the hardest days. There was no pressure to be perfect, just the understanding that hard work would lead to progress. And for Alex, that was exactly what he needed. On his days off, Alex spent a lot of time alone. He wasn't sure where to go or who to spend time with. His friends from before his imprisonment had moved on, and many of his family members were still distant. He didn't blame them. How could they understand what he had been through? How could they grasp the years of loneliness, the feeling of being trapped in a place where nothing was real except the fight for survival? He hadn't exactly been the most open person during his time in prison, so it made sense that he didn't have many people to turn to. But then, one afternoon, things began to change. He was sitting at a small diner, a place he often went to for lunch when he wanted to be alone. He wasn't looking for anything or anyone, just trying to enjoy a quiet moment. But as he sat there, the door to the diner opened and a familiar face walked in. It was his sister. Alex froze. He hadn't seen her in years, and even though he had thought about her often, he had never known how to reach out. They had always been close before he went to prison, but everything had changed. He had broken their trust when he was sent away for a crime he didn't commit, and that had caused a rift between them that felt impossible to repair. She spotted him immediately, her eyes widening in surprise. Without saying a word, she walked over to his table and sat down across from him. The silence between them was thick, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as if they were both trying to figure out what to say, what to do. "Alex," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "I can't believe it's really you." He stared at her, unsure of how to respond. The weight of the years, the misunderstandings, the distance, all of it seemed to hang in the air between them. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come out right away. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "I know I hurt you. I know I hurt everyone when I was locked away, and I don't know how to fix it. I don't even know where to begin." She looked at him, her expression softening. "You don't have to fix everything right now, Alex. I'm just glad you're out. I never stopped thinking about you. I didn't know what happened or why it happened, but I've been waiting for this day. For you to come home." Alex felt a lump form in his throat as he heard her words. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he wasn't alone. He wasn't just a man who had been abandoned. He was someone who still had a chance to make things right. "Can we start over?" he asked quietly. "I don't know how, but I want to." She smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Of course we can. It's going to take time, but we'll get there. I'm here for you, Alex. I always have been." For the first time in a long time, Alex felt a sense of peace. He wasn't sure what the future held, but sitting across from his sister, he knew that he wasn't as lost as he had once thought. There was still so much to rebuild, so many things to figure out, but with her by his side, he felt like maybe he could do it. Over the next few months, Alex and his sister began to reconnect. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of awkwardness, but they were slowly learning how to be a family again. His sister introduced him to some of the people in her life, and while Alex was hesitant at first, he slowly warmed up to the idea of forming new relationships. It wasn't about erasing the past, it was about moving forward one step at a time. At work, Alex continued to thrive. He became more confident in his skills as a mechanic, and Mike even offered him a chance to take on more responsibility at the shop. It wasn't the kind of job Alex had imagined for himself, but it was a good job. It gave him structure and purpose, and he was learning more every day. Mike had become a mentor in his own way, always there to offer guidance or a kind word when Alex needed it most. But as much as things were improving, there were still moments when the past would creep back in. There were days when Alex would find himself lost in thought, remembering the years he had spent in prison, wondering if the world had changed too much for him to catch up. But whenever those thoughts came, he reminded himself of how far he had come. He had fought for this freedom, for this second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. One day, while working at the shop, Alex received a call that would change everything. It was from his lawyer, who had been working on his case since his release. The call was brief, but it carried with it the weight of everything Alex had been hoping for. "Alex," the lawyer said, his voice filled with excitement, "we've received confirmation. The charges against you are officially dropped. You've been fully exonerated." Alex's heart skipped a beat as he processed the words. It wasn't just that he was free. It was that he had been wronged, and now, finally, the world was acknowledging it. The years of imprisonment, the loss of his future, the uncertainty, it was all finally being recognized. "I'm really free," Alex said softly, more to himself than to the lawyer. "Yes," the lawyer confirmed. "You're free, Alex, and now we can start working on your case to clear your name completely." For the first time in years, Alex felt like he could breathe without the constant weight of injustice bearing down on him. It wasn't just the freedom that mattered. It was the acknowledgement that he had been wronged, and that the world was finally making it right. With this new chapter opening, Alex knew there was still much to do. He still had to rebuild his life, still had to find his place in a world that had moved on without him, but he wasn't doing it alone anymore. With the support of his sister, his friend, and the new relationships he was forming, Alex was ready to face whatever came next. For the first time in a long while, Alex felt hope. Real hope. And that was enough to keep him moving forward. Alex had always imagined that freedom would feel like a huge, overwhelming wave crashing over him, sweeping him away into a new, uncharted world. But now that it had arrived, it felt different. It wasn't the grand spectacle he had pictured. Instead, it was a quiet, gradual shift, like the feeling of waking up after a long, restless night, finally realizing that the darkness had lifted. The first few weeks after his exoneration were filled with paperwork, legal processes, and the weighty realization that his entire life had been changed in an instant. He was no longer the man who had been wrongfully convicted. He was free, but freedom came with its own set of challenges. While the chains of prison had been removed, the chains of his past still clung to him, and Alex knew that it would take time to fully break free from them. At first, Alex wasn't sure what he was supposed to do with his newfound freedom. The world outside of prison was strange to him. Everything was louder, faster, and more overwhelming than he had remembered. The sounds of traffic, the hustle and bustle of people moving from one place to the next, it all felt like a whirlwind he hadn't been prepared for, but he was learning how to handle it. Little by little, he was adjusting to the pace of life outside. He spent more time with his sister, who had become his anchor in this new world. They talked about everything. What had happened to him, what had happened to them, and what the future might hold. There were still so many unspoken feelings between them, but there was also a deep understanding. They had both been through so much, and now they were both trying to heal. Every now and then, Alex would sit on his small balcony, looking out at the city as the sun set. He loved the quiet moments, the time when he could just think. His mind would often wander back to his days in prison, to the people he had met, the struggles he had faced. It was hard not to remember the pain, but it was also hard not to see how far he had come. One evening, as Alex sat watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, his phone rang. It was Mike, his boss from the mechanic's shop. He had become not only a boss, but a mentor and a friend to Alex over the past few months. His steady, calm presence had helped Alex through many difficult moments. "Hey, Alex," Mike said when Alex picked up the phone. "How's everything going?" "Good, good," Alex replied, his voice warm. "Just trying to adjust, you know." "I get it," Mike said, chuckling softly. "Listen, I've got a small favor to ask. There's a charity event coming up, and I thought it would be a good opportunity for you to get out there and meet some people. It's an event for local businesses and some folks from the community. I think it might help you get more connected." Alex wasn't sure about the idea. He wasn't one to be in the spotlight, and the thought of meeting new people made him uneasy. But Mike was persistent. "It's not about being in the spotlight," Mike said. It's about making connections. You've been doing great at the shop, and I think you're ready to start making moves outside of it. Plus, it'll give you a chance to talk to people who know what it's like to build something from nothing. Alex hesitated, but then realized that this could be a chance to step outside his comfort zone. He had been hiding behind the walls of his past for too long. It was time to take the next step. "All right," Alex said finally. "I'll do it." The event was held in a large hall on the outskirts of the city, and when Alex arrived, he felt the nerves creeping up his spine. The place was buzzing with energy, filled with people in suits and dresses, exchanging business cards and chatting excitedly about their various projects. Alex felt out of place at first, but as he walked around the room, he couldn't help but notice that no one seemed to care about his past. They were more focused on what he could do now. The thought was both humbling and freeing. As the evening went on, Alex found himself talking to a few people. One man, a small business owner, was particularly friendly. He asked Alex about his work at the shop and seemed genuinely interested in his story. "You've come a long way," the man said, his eyes reflecting a sense of admiration. "It's not easy, but it's clear you've got the drive. That's what makes the difference, you know?" Alex nodded, surprised by the warmth and kindness he was receiving. For the first time since his release, he felt like he was being seen for who he was now, not for what had happened in the past, but for what he had overcome and where he was headed. Later that night, Mike found Alex near the bar, a drink in hand. "So what do you think?" Mike asked with a smile. "Not so bad, right?" Alex smiled back, feeling a sense of relief. "Yeah, I think you were right. It wasn't as bad as I thought." Mike raised his glass. "It's all about taking that first step. You did great tonight." The next few days went by in a blur. The conversations at the event had sparked something in Alex. He started to think more about his future, about what he could really accomplish if he kept pushing forward. He wasn't just someone who had been in prison anymore. He was someone who had survived it, who had learned from it, and who was ready to build something meaningful. As Alex sat down to dinner with his sister a few days after the event, he felt a sense of clarity that had been missing for so long. He had been so focused on surviving, on just getting by, that he had forgotten what it was like to dream, to have a purpose. But now the world felt full of possibilities. "I've been thinking," Alex said, looking at his sister across the table. "Maybe it's time I do more than just work at the shop. Maybe I could open my own place, start my own business. I've learned a lot, and I think I could make it work." His sister looked at him, her eyes full of pride and encouragement. "I think that's a great idea. You've got the skills, the heart. You can do this, Alex." Alex smiled, feeling a spark of hope ignite inside him. For the first time, he could see the future stretching out in front of him, full of possibilities. There was so much work to be done, but he wasn't afraid anymore. He had his sister, his friend Mike, and the strength he had built over the years. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to take it. A few months later, Alex took the first step toward his new goal. He rented a small garage space and started working on fixing up cars in his own shop. The work wasn't easy, and the hours were long, but every time he turned a wrench or cleaned up a dusty engine, he felt like he was building something that mattered. It wasn't just about the cars. It was about proving to himself and to the world that he could succeed, that he could build something lasting. And as the days went by, Alex knew that his past didn't define him. The years he had spent in prison, the mistakes, the setbacks, they were all part of the story, but they didn't control his future. He was in control now, and he was ready to keep moving forward.